guys, so I don't really have a super long intro for this video. Usually I ramble on for a little bit in the beginning of my videos. So we're just gonna get right started. Does that even make sense? Get right started? Get started right away. My mom sent me an article yesterday about this and I decided I wanted to do a whole video on it because I don't see a lot of people talking about it, which I think is kind of strange. Granted, I didn't know about it until my mom sent the article to me, so I guess I can't blame them. I will be going through the article with you guys and showing pictures of the actual article. It's on CNN, but I will of course link it down below if you want to read it fully on your own without the inserted things here, but I will be going through it with you. This actually also sparked another video idea that I really want to do. Let me know if you guys are interested in it. It's basically mental illness stigma in Eastern versus Western cultures. Although it seems like here in the Western part of the world, which granted not all of you are from the Western part of the world, but where I am from and from my perspective, it may look like we're making headway in reducing the stigma of mental illnesses, but countries like Japan still very much stigmatize mental illness. There's actually, which is related to the story we're going to talk about today, there's actually multiple cases of people in Japan murdering their own children because they are mentally ill. And the main motivator to this is because of the shame that it would bring to their family if society knew about their child being mentally ill. So let's go ahead and start at the beginning of the article, which is a brief synopsis of what actually happened in this situation, this tragic event that happened. A couple was arrested at the end of last month in December when their 33-year-old daughter was discovered dead after being locked in a room for 15 years. Although she was emaciated and only weighed 42 pounds, she did die from the exposure to the cold. Please forgive me for the pronunciation of any of these Japanese names. I am not very familiar with pronunciations, but I am going to try my best. Ari Kakimoto was locked in a windowless room, fed only one meal a day, and was forced to drink water through a tube. The room she was kept in had an air conditioner, a toilet, and surveillance cameras only. There was no heat in the room, and of course she died in the middle of winter, and she was actually kept in a structure that was right next to her parents' house. Now, Ari was 33 years old, and the father told police that they had locked her up when she was 16. They claim that the reason why they locked her up in the first place was because she was mentally ill and violent. They were arrested on the terms of abandoning a corpse, and the police have 23 days to decide if they're going to press charges. Okay, so there's a story of what happened, the brief synopsis, and this is only an extreme situation of the extent of people will go to hide mental illness, but unfortunately, this is not the only case that this has happened. In Japan, last August, a 72-year-old mother killed her 49-year-old mentally ill son. In May of 2016, an 81-year-old man suffocated his 47-year-old daughter and then killed himself. So let's talk a little bit about the stigma that is oh so strong in the East. A sociology professor named Kohei Yamamoto stated that this shows the strong social stigma against mental illness in Japan. He said that the parents were also victims of a Japanese society, given the way that they hid their daughter away from society, which lacks support for the mentally ill and disabled. He did also add that this isn't just common in Japan, but also in many, many countries. Like I said, I'll probably do a whole video on this, of the differences between mental health treatments and social stigma against mental illness in the Western cultures and Eastern cultures, but let's go ahead and talk about the difference a little bit between mental health treatment in the East versus the West. First, I do want to say that race and culture do play a huge part in perceived stigma of mental illness, which race and culture and the stigma of mental illness sounds similar, but it could be a separate whole video on its own because there are so many studies done with different races and different cultures surrounding the idea of mental illness stigma. So again, if that's something that you would want, please let me know. I'll actually link an interesting article down below that talks about different studies surrounding stigma, but I am going to use a little bit of references from that article in this video. So in that article, it reads, "In Asia, where many cultures value conformity to norms, emotional self-control, and family recognition through achievement, mental illnesses are often stigmatized and seen as a source of shame. However, the stigma of mental illness can be influenced by other factors such as perceived cause of the illness." One of the studies it talks about is where they take Chinese American participants and European American participants, give them a story about a character who was diagnosed with either schizophrenia or major depressive disorder. They were then either told that the disorder was genetic, partly genetic, or not genetic at all. The participants were then asked how they would feel if their children were to marry or reproduce with the subjects in the story, and the results were really interesting. It said that the story that attributed the illness to being genetic reduced the unwillingness to marry and reproduce among the Chinese American participants. However, the same genetic attribution increased the European American participants' unwillingness to marry and reproduce. Basically, if the illness was genetic, Chinese Americans would be more inclined to allow their children to marry and reproduce with those people. And it's saying that if the disorder was genetic, that the European Americans were less likely to be okay with their children reproducing and marrying, you know, the people with the disorder. So this shows that the cause of the illness can actually influence the stigma around mental illness depending on the culture. Also, I want to point out that the percentage of embarrassment and discrimination in developing countries is twice as much as those in developed countries, which means that they're even more shamed in those societies and they feel even more shameful and they're less likely to reach out for help. And clearly there are very extreme situations where people would rather die or have family members die than to admit a weakness or admit to a mental illness and seek help for that. It's obviously important that we take these things into consideration when we're developing ways to reduce stigma in different cultures and different countries. The article states that presenting mental health care services in culturally sensitive ways may be essential to increasing access and usage of mental health care. I'm actually really surprised that there aren't more people talking about this story of the woman who died because her family was too ashamed to get her help. I can't blame the parents because of the society that they live in, the culture and the stigma of the country that they live in. But to me, it definitely was an unnecessary death, and more really needs to be done in other countries besides just in the Western world. And I think that we might have to tweak and change how we approach this and how we help reduce stigma in these countries, because they view it in a completely different way. So it wouldn't make sense for us to continue with how we do it in Western cultures over in the Eastern cultures. I will leave both articles that I talked about in this video down below. It is a really heartbreaking story to me, and you know, like I said, I can't blame those who were involved, but it still makes it a horrifying example of what mental illness stigma is really like in other countries. Please let me know if you want a whole video on Eastern versus Western cultures and the mental illness stigma within them and the treatment for mental illness within those cultures. I could do that video, and also race and culture involved in mental illness stigma and how it's different based on race and different cultures. Please share this video if you want other people to know more about this story and, you know, this kind of topic, because not a lot of people talk about it, and it is kind of new to me, but it's completely opened my eyes to the kind of world that's out there, because, you know, we live in our own country and we really only look at that. And it seems like in America we've come such a long way, which we have. And in Western cultures in general, we've come such a long way in reducing the stigma and talking about it, being open about it, regardless of what the cause is. We don't really look at that as a reason for shame. But when we look at Eastern cultures and just other countries struggling with this, it's still like, you know, like it was 100 years ago for us. So we really need to help them develop the reduction of mental illness stigma, but in the appropriate and, you know, considerate way that is right for their culture. I'd love to hear from you guys, especially if you are in an Eastern culture, and how it is different, if you have any personal examples of it, or if I'm completely off base here with this video. I'd love your opinions down below. I hope you enjoyed, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.